Hi, we're Eric and Elizabeth Schenkel. It is a tremendous blessing to us to be with you for your Love Your City Conference 2022. Those of you who have come from Nigeria, Kenya, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, from San Antonio, Atlanta, Boston, other places around the nation and around the world, we greet you, and we are so excited to be with you. We wish we could have been with you in person, but we hope that this video presentation will be an encouragement to you. You all are such an inspiration to us. We're so excited when we hear about and hear stories from the work of Boy with a Ball around the world, and our hearts are with you in your work. So we're hoping that our story will intersect with your story as we tell our story today, and will be an encouragement to you in your work. So we want to set our story first in the context of a moment in Scripture at the end of John's Gospel, the 16th chapter. Jesus is with his disciples, and his disciples say to him, "Jesus, now we finally get it. We understand that you are sent from God." And this is an important moment in their experience, of course, but he says to them, well, that's good, but very soon we're going to experience some trouble and you will leave me. And then he says, "But I am not alone, because the Father is with me. I have told you this so that you might have peace in me. In the world you will have trouble, but take courage. I have conquered the world." We began our lives together in our ministry in the greater Boston area, spent 22 years there, involved in establishing and helping to pastor a church, to start a Christian school, and we were very involved in the community there, had many wonderful friendships and relationships through those years, and were well settled there. 5 children, dog, cat, nice home, 2 cars. But at one point, God moved on our hearts with the need of those parts of the world that had very few Christians in them. The parts of the world where the knowledge of God through Jesus Christ was very slim, and the parts of the world where the physical need, material need, the need for food, water, and education was greater than where we were living. And one Sunday, a young woman stood up in our church and announced that her organization was setting up a partnership with a city in Central Asia, in a city called Tashkent, Uzbekistan, an area that had been under Soviet domination for 70 years, and before that, under Islamic domination. And so it was an area where there were just a few thousand followers of Jesus in a country of nearly 35, 40 million people. And so our hearts were stirred right away. We made a visit to their team in Tashkent, and God opened the door for us to actually consider making a move there with our family, which we did. It was a wrenching experience for us, but one in which we felt the cost to us was small compared to the privilege of serving people who didn't have a lot of folks serving them. And so we made the move with joy and experienced a wonderful settling in process there. Made many, many friends that we have to this day. I was there both as a Christian worker, but also as a university professor. We established there a non-governmental organization focused on education and also on community development through microfinance loans. And we had a wonderful place in the community there in Uzbekistan. Most of the folks in Uzbekistan are loving, hospitable, very wonderful folks. Many of them are practicing Muslims, many are not after the Soviet years, but we found such warm hospitality there. But there were trouble spots, including a very oppressive government and some very active terrorist movements.
You know, after we were there for about 4 years and things were going well, I remember one day Eric came home with a big box of American toilet paper that had somehow come through to the NGO, and we opened it, and the girls, our 2 little daughters, 8 and 12, were with us at that point, and and they were so excited. And I remember Eric saying that night, we're going to have to do something differently because we're just not suffering enough here. This is getting too posh, too easy. I woke up the next morning, providentially at 4 a.m, with the awareness that there was a man standing in the doorway of our bedroom. I thought maybe it was Eric, but it didn't feel like it was Eric. I closed my eyes, I opened them again, and there was a man at the end of our bed and another man in the doorway, and I realized that we were being attacked. And I just yelled to Eric, wake up, they're here. We had been aware that the house was being watched, and there was this very small but very dangerous terrorist organization in the country. So no sooner had I woken Eric than the first blow hit my head, and so there was one guy on one side of the bed beating me with the blunt side of a metal hatchet, and another man on the other side of the bed beating Eric, and they just wailed on us. I ended up with multiple skull fractures. He ended up with multiple concussions. We both had broken bones as well. It was a horrible incident, a horrible attack. And I thought it was my last day. I thought, oh my gosh, this was my last day. I was 46 years old. I thought this was it. I was done. But God in his mercy spared us. And I remember I was finally unconscious. And when I awoke, I was on the floor of our bedroom, bleeding and in bad shape, and it was completely quiet in the house, and I thought that Eric and the girls were all dead. Mercifully, they were not. He was out rescuing them, and the men had run away, and he took the girls to the neighbors and then came back and found me and tried to comfort me, tried to take care of me while we waited for a long time for an ambulance to come. And as we were waiting, he said to me at one point, honey, someday you're going to look back at this as the best day of your life. And I thought, what are you talking about? This was horrible. This was nightmarish, But then I referenced in my mind all the saints who've gone before, starting with Stephen and right on through the history of the church who have suffered or died for their faith and for the expansion of the gospel into the world. And I realized that this was actually a great privilege. I'm so glad that he, was inspired by the Holy Spirit to say that to me, because it really put this suffering into context and made it a joyful experience. I can honestly say that year that followed that attack in our time of recovery, of continued suffering and weakness and fear, became a real time of joy because of the fellowship with the Lord that we had in the midst of that. But even better than that, when we were airlifted out of the country after about 24 hours to Europe, I remember as the little plane took off, and I was just in and out of consciousness, but when the plane actually took off, I heard the Lord speaking to me in my heart, and he said, you're not finished here, you need to go back, or in that case, you need to come back. And so as soon as I could, when Eric and I had a moment alone in the hospital in Austria, I said to him, I think we're meant to go back. And he said, I know, of course, we're supposed to go back. And that was not an obvious choice at that point. Nobody expected us to go back. Certainly the people in Uzbekistan didn't expect us to go back. My family didn't expect us to go back. But we knew we were meant to go back. And it turns out that in going back, in hearing God's voice and going back, we were able to experience the redemption of God in the midst of suffering, that God takes terrible things. It's not that was a good thing that happened to us. It was a terrible thing that happened to us. But God redeems everything, and he redeemed that, and he turned that into really a priceless gift. Because before that, I had gone out to speak to women's groups and always, when I would speak, I said good things, but they always took a huge discount off of what I said, that I didn't understand them, I wasn't one of them, I was just this American who didn't know what she was talking about, which maybe, arguably true. But, but after that, I had like more credit than I should have had. They saw me as one of them. We both became members of that community. We were adopted into that community by virtue of having suffered as they had all suffered. They all had stories. They all had stories from the Soviet Union, all of them, every family. And so it was like God gave us the credentials that we needed to be effective in that place in bringing the good news. It was amazing, amazing, amazing. So not only did we have the joy of being with Jesus in that, but we had the joy of this incredibly fruitful time after that.
Not only were we able to continue in Uzbekistan for another 6 years, but something else happened that we hadn't anticipated. There was, shortly after we got back, just a few weeks, there was an attack in the U.S. that we now call 9/11. Terrorists brought down towers in New York City. And the next thing we heard was, well, the Taliban, this group that's in Afghanistan, is responsible. Well, Afghanistan was our neighboring country. And we began to hear the U.S. is going to invade Afghanistan and root out the Taliban, and they're going to invade through Uzbekistan. So they were coming our way. And I had been chosen to lead for the year the little group of non-governmental organization leaders that were serving in Uzbekistan. And it was a nothing job. You set up the chairs for a couple meetings a year, and that was all. Well, what happened was, after the U.S. invasion, the troops coming right through our country, going south, driving the Taliban south, all of those who wanted to provide humanitarian assistance to the hundreds of thousands of refugees that were strewn across the landscape in Afghanistan needed to be given permission to cross the border from Uzbekistan into Afghanistan. And so, as the leader of the NGO group, I was thrown into the position of negotiating with the Uzbek government and the UN a humanitarian corridor across the Friendship Bridge, as it was called, from Uzbekistan into Afghanistan, which, by the grace of God, we were able to do. And as the groups began to go in, I realized, wow, this is another 35 or 40 million people in poverty, with very poor education systems, with very few rights for women, but desperately in need of spiritual help. This is a group where there are very few followers of Jesus, even less in Uzbekistan, in this population of close to 40 million people. And so we took our NGO across the border as one of those. I put our group right at the top. We made it into northern Afghanistan and began work there as well. We set up one little school called Seeds of Hope for the children of widows and for orphaned children. We were able to build several other schools and be involved in a lot of English teaching and lots of things that were drawing lots of folks and lots of avenues to express the love of Jesus. And we began to see people's lives changed and wonderful things happen in Afghanistan, just as we had seen in Uzbekistan. But again, there was trouble. In fact, it seems like in Afghanistan there was almost continual trouble. There was always a bomb going off on our street, or gunfire, or one thing and another happening. But the culmination came a number of years later in 2014, when our center, by now we had expanded into 3 cities. We were in Mazar-e Sharif, Kabul, and Herat, and our office in Kabul was attacked by 4 Taliban fighters with suicide vests, automatic weapons, hurling grenades into our property, and our director was killed, and his 2 teenage children were killed. And it's quite a story. It's a South African family, the Grunewald family. Hanali was actually a doctor who was serving in the hospital, and she was on duty when her husband and 2 teenage children were brought in after this attack, and she was the one who had to identify their bodies. So we experienced trouble in Afghanistan as well, but we left lasting fruit, both in the country and now that refugees have been driven out by the Taliban takeover there, around the world where people's lives were touched and changed because of the love that God enabled us to show in that difficult country. So what then is our conclusion? What might I suggest that you could draw from the scripture and from the intersection of our story and your stories? Well, you are always in the midst of trouble. Your whole work is focused on helping people who are in trouble. And God will enable you to experience trouble. And He does that in order to soften us up and make us usable and to mold us into the communities that we're a part of. And in fact, if you think about it, running toward trouble is what gospel ministry is all about. That's what Jesus did. That's what the incarnation was. Jesus running to the greatest trouble that ever existed, the sinfulness of humankind, to solve that problem. The Apostle Paul giving up his life to run into trouble again and again, as we read in the book of Acts, not because he needed to, but because others needed him and needed the message he was bringing and needed to know the love of God. So the first lesson that we see is we will all experience trouble, and that trouble will be a part of our life and our ministry. But the second point, much happier point, is that we should be of good courage because our work will be fruitful. Our work is always fruitful because Jesus is working through us. He will glorify Himself as He enables us to love others and serve others, and He will reveal Himself to many people as we do so. So the fruitfulness comes from Him and from our vital connection with Him, and it comes even in the midst of difficulty. And the third and most important point of all, as Elizabeth pointed out, is we are not alone. Jesus is always with us. He says, I will be with you always, even to the end of the age, even as He commissioned us to be everywhere in the world. And His desire is that, like a vine, His people grow into every community, so that there are people in every community displaying His love through practical action and lifestyle and declaring His message. And so that will always be His purpose, and He will always be with us as we do that. God is with us, and His presence with us is the sweetest thing in our lives. Even in the midst of trouble, it brings sweetness. And even in the midst of the good times, the presence of Jesus is there as a reminder that there's something better even than the good things of this life, and that is relationship with God that begins here in this life and lasts for all eternity. And so, as I said, Elizabeth and I are so excited about what you are doing as an organization. We're excited to have this honor to address you today, and we ask God's blessing on all of you and on the work that you're doing with Boy with a Ball.
We're praying for you. God bless you.